That. Actually, I'm grateful for the introduction. I was on my way here today. A little man came up to me and said, didn't you used to be Paddy Ashdown? But it turns out I still am, and that's very helpful for me. Last time I was here at one of these great talks a couple of years ago, I was talking about how I thought the international scene would change in the years ahead. Now I want to come a little closer to home. I shall start with a piece of poetry, and I shall end with one because it's a passion of mine. And the poem I want to start with is a couple of 3 lines from my countryman, W.B. Yeats' great poem, The Second Coming. And it begins, turning and turning on the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. All spins outward, the center cannot hold, the good lack all conviction, and the bad burn with a fiery intensity. It's very difficult for me to think of those lines, which echo through my head a good deal these days, and not think of the decay and dissolution, which I think we all sense is taking place in our political structures and in our governments. And when I say our, I mean our in the Western world. You know, these are dangerous times because politics all around us, it seems to me, is failing, at least conventional politics. The politics that's succeeding is the politics of simple solutions for complex times, the politics of the demagogue. I don't think I can remember, in rather a long career in politics, any time when governments have been so distrusted, when politicians have been so disrespected, when the political dialogue, which ought to be about a rational approach to politics, has been so sublimated, so diverted by those who fill the space where rational dialogue should be, with the raucous shouts of the demagogue. Well, maybe this is just the misanthropy of an old man, and saying, as old men so often do, things are not as good as they were in my day. But I think there's more to it than that. I mean, take a look at all our Western democracies. And what you see is the rise of the right or the left, in some cases, pushing its way through and establishing itself on the basis not of rational politics, but of a fear and an anger which they play off in our populations. Now, maybe that's just a convulsion. Maybe it'll go away. But maybe it won't. Those of us with long memories may well recall that a terrible series of events took place not long ago in Europe, which began with political failure. I mean, let me make these 2 propositions to you. The progress of progressive politics for the last 150 years, let's say since the middle of the 19th century, has really been about the progress of 2 central ideas. One is to win public support in favor of a proposition for the common good. That you win support amongst the people for a proposition that says we must suppress vested interests if they stand against the progress towards common values and the common weal. I put to you today that it is almost impossible to do that in current politics, because any proposition for the common good in these last decade or so has been almost immediately torn down by the vociferous arguments and raucous calls of vested interest. The very basis of our progressive politics now seems to be undermined, this vociferous call that can be put together almost in a flash using the systems of the social network that will appear on the streets and disappear. That, you know, the great arguments that have dominated our politics in the past, the arguments of isms, communism, capitalism, socialism, for which people died, are now being replaced by this sort of flash demonstration about a single issue. Genetically modified foods, hunting whales, whatever it is, which I think has now had a profound impact on the nature of our political debate. And I worry, simply for the process of the continuation of irrational politics in complex times. The second issue, which strikes me and undermines the basis for progressive politics, is right since those early days, the middle of the 19th century, the proposition that was put to us, which could always win support, was about unity. It was about standing together. It was about standing together across the classes, across the colors. It was about ignoring racism. It was about our common humanity. It was about our unities, the unities of our countries and the unities of Europe. And yet the voices that you hear that are winning support in the public debate these days are not the voices for unity. It is the dialogue of division nowadays which dominates our public discourse. In our country, in my country, in England, it nearly tore the nation apart. As the Scots said, we want to get away from them. And underpinning that whole debate, not at the top, but at the bottom, there were violently nationalist forces. You know, I'm a patriot. I love my country. But my love of my country is not based on having to hate someone else's. I've seen destructive patriotism, nationalism. I've seen it in Northern Ireland. I've seen it in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I've seen it elsewhere. I've fought against it all my life. And here it was, that dialogue beginning to develop the politics of division. And in my country, the United Kingdom Independence Party now proposes exactly that. It believes in only three things. It believes in a hate of Brussels and foreigners, by the way, a distrust and a hate for Westminster, and a please can we return to the 1950s. Those are the three things it believes in. Now, if you imagine that I'm targeting UKIP, I'm not much anyway. Because you'll find the same thing in Marine Le Pen in France, in the Front National. You'll find the same thing in the New Right in Germany, in Denmark, in Holland, and of course in the New Left. It doesn't have to be right or left in those difficult economic situations that occur, for instance, in Greece and elsewhere. It's very difficult to make a proposition about our unity and our common humanity today. Now, I say all this not because I think politicians have not been guilty of the mistakes that have created this situation. I mean, we've behaved badly. Politicians have abandoned the space where that great debate of principle should be and reduced ourselves back to the politics of managerialism. Never mind the principles, never mind the creeds. It's an era of the death of creeds and the dissolution of institutions. Never mind those. The fact of the matter is, you can accept us as a government just if we manage things better. If we deliver more of the goodies to you, you can be satisfied. That's what's happened. So who should be surprised that the space where the great clash of principles should be, which is at the heart of politics? If it's a vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum. It's going to be filled by the press with a conspiracy to be obsessed with the petty, if it isn't filled by us with a clash of ideas. It can be filled not by those who, in the pursuit of progressive politics, seek to appeal to the better angels of our nature, but those who sing the devil's song. So much of the fault lies with us. But I think there's something more fundamental at the heart of this. And this is what I want to get onto now. I begin to wonder whether the politics of the classic nation state created in the 19th century, largely here in Europe, has reached the end of its utility, at least as a monopoly system for governance. You see, it seems to me that the nation state depends on two great lies. And those lies are these. The first is that the nation state, Brussels, Berlin, Paris, London, Washington, is supremely sovereign and supremely powerful. And we, when we ask for your vote, can beg for it on the basis that we can vote me into power, I will solve everything. But in fact, the advent of international power, power on the global stage, has meant that the nation state can no longer do that. There's no domestic issue that now does not have an international quotient. In fact, a government, a chancellor of the exchequer, a minister of finance does not have full sovereignty because he has to do what the markets say. And so it is with crime, and so it is with security, and so it is with environmental cleanliness to save our planet, to save us from poisoning our very living space. So all of those things that the nation state says, please vote for me, actually it can't deliver, so who should be surprised if people are disappointed? I spoke about this last time, and I concluded that insofar as there is power, huge amounts of it's now on the global stage, we must now begin to build the systems of global governance. We in Europe have made the first step towards that by creating a supranational institution in which we share sovereignty for the benefit of our citizens at home. Although that is offensive to many in our countries, it is in a global world, it is the only way where that citizens' benefit can be adequately delivered. But the one I want to talk about in the minutes left to me now is a rather different one. I am particularly struck by the massive mismatch between the way that people live their ordinary lives and the way they are governed. You see, you live your ordinary lives designing your own future. You're given freedoms you never had before. By the internet, by the systems of new technologies, you heard so much about them before. You are treated as king in the marketplace. It's your choice that is met by those who wish to succeed. Your every action, every purchase is measured by them. And the difference between the powerful citizen at home, the powerful citizen in their private life, and the citizen governed by this distant institution, miles away, that doesn't understand our problems, speaks a language that is alien to us, and won't respond to our needs, is, I think, one of the things that's smashing up confidence in the system of governance in our country, in our countries. You see, here's the thought, that actually the nation state, this great cosmic black hole, has now sucked so much power into it that it has itself become dysfunctional. It seeks to govern everything. It seeks to interfere in everything. It has become impossible, even for a good government, to manage the power it has now received. And my view is that if we want to try and re-enliven our democracy, we have to take that power and hand it back to citizens to determine their own decisions, to make that connection between the taxes they pay and the services they enjoy. Because so long as we launder that taxation through our national capital, it becomes their money, not ours. So I think we now need to have, democracy is 2,500 years old, and we've developed it all the way through those years since Pericles in Athens at 500 BC. And it hasn't changed. So now we need to think about whether or not the power residing in the nation state needs to be redistributed. And I think it does. Some upwards to those supranational institutions that we need, but a lot downwards. You see, if our states, if our Londons, our Washingtons, our Berlins, our Parises dealt with only those things that a state has to deal with, if they did less, could they not do it better? If they dealt with our national defense, our national foreign policy, our national economic policy, our national transport infrastructure, and all of those things which delivered services to the citizen, health, education, welfare, were devolved so they were closer to citizens to make their own decisions. It's up to the state to decide what standards should be achieved, but maybe how you achieve them should be decided by you, so that you can get engaged in that process. And if in this area they want to choose one mechanism to have for their health and their education and their welfare, and in that area another, so be it. That's democracy in action. We need to begin to re-engage the citizen, and the only way we can do that, ladies and gentlemen, is to change the balance of power, to take the power now residing in our national state capitals and put them down closer to community so people get engaged in the decisions that affect their lives and how their taxes are used. And only if we do that can we begin to re-enliven our democracy, can we begin to fight back against those who would see the negative rather than the positive in the ways forward. There's something very important, and Paul Dujardin mentioned it earlier on today when he said, how do we get ourselves away from the me and back to the we, back to the us? How do we move away from the concept of selfishness? See, there are two parts of our beings. One is the me and the other is us. One is my selfishness, what I want, but the other is what we hold together in common as a community. And we're in danger of losing the second. And it seems to me that the art of that requires a new political framework, but it also requires a new political attitude. I look around this hall, and what I see is diversity. And it would be a tragedy for us all if that were to be lost. We have to find the way to get back to the point where we value diversity again, where we see immigration as an advantage, not a disadvantage. And here I think I want to propose for you a motto for our time. It comes from a remarkable poem written actually in 1904 by a man called, an Indian, called Rabindranath Tagore. And I just believe that if we want to struggle away out of a very dangerous world to something better, here are the words we might hold in our mind. And Tagore wrote this in 1904. We are all the more one because we are many. For we have left an ample space for love in the gap where we were sundered. Our unlikeness shines with the radiance of a common creation, like mountain peaks in the morning sun. You just know he has the Himalayas in mind, like mountain peaks in the morning sun. It seems to me that it is not our sameness, it's not our divisions, it's not our uniqueness that defines, that is the greatest revelation of the divine, if whatever divine you happen to believe in, or indeed the greatest revelation of our humanity. It is our differences. And if we can begin to value those, if we can begin to create a political structure which gives power not to the state, but to the empowered citizen, if we begin to realize that it is our diversity that is the greatest gift we have and the greatest expression of humanity, then whatever confronts us now in terms of dissolution, fracture, and threat, I feel certain it can be surmounted. Thank you very much.